Has law enforcement looked the other way on fentanyl trafficking? How much are you paying in wine taxes? Voters oppose data centers, $1 million starter homes, and Virginia's gun ban blocked. Welcome to the States, powered by the Center Square. It's Friday, June 26, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop.
Well, let me just say this to you, sir. Again, it is my time. 3,900 children were separated from their families.
450,000 kids were lost during the Biden administration.
Secretary,
say a word
Mr. Secretary, do not interrupt.
Don't you point your finger at me. Don't
I
be
will
a hypocrite.
point my finger
Don't you be
at
a hypocrite
you.
then. Then you be as you should be as upset about the 450,000 kids that were lost. You didn't say a word about it. For 4 years, you never said a word.
Mr. Secretary.
A U.S. House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing devolved into a shouting match between Connecticut Democratic U.S. Representative Rosa DeLauro and Department of Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin. The Thursday hearing was supposed to examine the department's recent immigration policies, including migrant children separation. But as you saw there, the hearing escalated. Republicans have been highlighting the 95% reduction in illegal border crossings during the second Trump administration, which also overseen the deportation of self-removal of more than 2 million migrants who had been in the country illegally. During the former Biden administration, more than 14 million illegal entries were reported nationwide, according to reporting by the Center Square, including 2 million gotaways, those who evaded capture. Now, as a result, children were released to alleged gang members, human traffickers, non-family members, and sent to non-residential addresses. Federal Inspector General audits showing and a Florida grand jury found. The Center Square reporting on all of that. More than 300,000 of those children still unaccounted for, according to the U.S. Department of Justice. But it's not just the human trafficking that's raising concerns from the previous administration's handling of the border. There's also the public safety component of fentanyl trafficking, and recent 19-year DEA veteran has blown the whistle on the previous administration's handling of those fentanyl investigations. Now, joining us here with the states to discuss this further is Empower Oversight President Tristan Leavitt. Tristan, thanks for taking time with us here, and tell us about David Howell.
David is as you mentioned, very experienced DEA veteran, and he has been in New Mexico his entire career. And at a certain point, he recognized that things were really going off the rails. Back in 2019, the Trump Justice Department put out new protocols that were related to how DEA and other law enforcement agents should respond if they're up on a wiretap and they hear talk of trafficking fentanyl. And those protocols were modeled after protocols. You and I have talked before about my work on Operation Fast and Furious 15 years ago. The work there that Congress did resulted in protocols for firearms trafficking, and fentanyl was deemed to be so dangerous that it was added to this category. That if you hear of it, you have to try and stop it, unlike other types of drugs where DEA routinely lets shipments go in an effort to identify further up the chain. So when David Howell noticed that the U.S. Attorney's Office was starting to tell them, no, don't stop these shipments, he spoke up about it. In some cases, he seized it anyway. The U.S. Attorney's Office got upset with him. And so he ended up going on somewhat of a journey where for some months he filed with various government agencies to try and draw attention to this and to ensure that people could understand why this was such a problem. So this has now become public through an AP story, and we're glad that the public has the chance to hear for themselves what the DEA was doing.
Yeah, and when you mentioned Fast and Furious, that was one of the first things I read or thought when I was reading about this, and just the idea of this tactic of walking illicit materials to essentially what is this tactic about? Explain that so people fully understand why law enforcement is allowing fentanyl, or in Fast and Furious, the guns to walk.
So in both instances, you've kind of got two related and similar motivations or concerns. So the first is a desire to go beyond just the lowest level individuals there. So in Fast and Furious, they had this goal that they're going to somehow take down the trafficking cartels, the drug cartels. And I think there's a similar motivation with fentanyl, and saying you can hear the former Biden U.S. Attorney Alex Ubalez has been speaking pretty openly about how their office pushed this. And they are saying, well, we needed to do it to catch again more people than the lower level. The second kind of motivation is there's an element of it's difficult to get up on a wiretap, a federal wiretap. So once they are, law enforcement tends to want to I mean, obviously you want to preserve the wire, but there's a tension in law enforcement who are saying, don't do anything at all. If we seize this stuff, they'll know that we're onto them, versus saying, no, there are lots of ways that you can seize these materials and not have it tip off the wire, such as by having local law enforcement do the stop. You can make it a traffic stop. Looks like you were going a little faster than you should have. You got a tail light out or something else like that. There are lots of ways that law enforcement can stop a car, seize what's inside of it without revealing that there's a wiretap open.
Now, Tristan, Fast and Furious obviously was a huge scandal years ago. People just now tuning in politically may not remember that, but I mean, that led to somebody being shot and killed, another law enforcement officer being shot and killed with one of those guns, correct?
That's right. And in fact, the reality is many, many, many people were shot and killed with them, but the vast majority were south of the U.S. border. And so most Americans didn't take notice until Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry died on the night of December 15th, 2010. And at that scene were recovered 2 weapons that trace back to Fast and Furious. And that's what motivated John Dodson, the original whistleblower, to come forward. That's what really brought attention to that scandal. And that was actually the beginning of my working with whistleblowers, because I was so impressed with John and his conviction and courage and saying he needed to speak up about this.
But fast forward to today, fentanyl is considered even by President Donald Trump as like a weapon of war. Is this not rising to the level of where people are a little concerned with this tactic of walking dangerous drugs onto the streets?
Well, you've got a disconnect here. Within the DEA and the U.S. Attorney's Office, they don't seem to have seen the issue. Some did, to be clear. David Howell was not the only one, and others have spoken up. The AP article that made this public also interviewed a DEA supervisor who has retired, and he identified that well beyond what the trafficking, the walking that David knew about. He said he watched a vehicle with 1.8 million fentanyl pills, but was told by the U.S. Attorney's Office to stand down and not seize them. So within the agency, there was this mindset. But what David has said from the time I met him was, once the public finds out about this, they will be outraged. We can talk all we want about bigger cases and tactics, this and that, but this is a situation where the public had their lives put at stake. And so the disconnect you see with the Albuquerque mayor, with the governor of New Mexico speaking up about it, right? Speaking up about Biden administration policies. You don't see that kind of Democrat speaking against Democrat policies very often. But I think the public is very, very alarmed now that this has all become a matter of public concern.
So David puts out he blows the whistle on this. There's a report done. What did the DOJ's Office of Professional Regulation and Responsibility say ultimately about David's report?
They really circled the wagons. So the process that this goes through that required them to do a report is the Office of Special Counsel, an agency that I previously led, and they have a function where if you make a whistleblower disclosure, if they think it meets an important enough threshold and is likely to be true allegations, they send it to the agency and require a report. DOJ in 2024 under the Biden administration really circled the wagons and said, well, we believe that this 2019 protocol gave discretion, even though the protocol specifically said if you become aware on a wiretap of trafficking, you need to take all practicable steps to stop it. And they said, well, it says practicable. That implies that, it's reasonable. So that means you could not do it also, right? It's totally illogical. And so they argued that about the past policy, but at the same time, they also put out a new policy that specifically gives discretion. And so they basically blew off the concerns that David expressed. And OSC's procedures are to make that report public, redacted names, redacted information there. For instance, they redacted the word protocol, which sounds a lot more formal than just what they said, guidance. But an AP reporter saw that put out on OSC's website, and that's how he wanted to try and track down David. He realized they failed to redact a letter from David's name and asked around until he got in touch. And David said, well, it's a risk to my career, but I am willing to speak up about this because I think it really harms American lives.
Again, the president's referred to fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. Is the Trump administration doing enough to not just address the fentanyl issue and the border issue, as we opened up with the exchange in Congress earlier this week, but is he doing enough to help whistleblowers?
Well, we've had a very positive response working with the Trump administration on whistleblowers. A number of our FBI clients, we were able to successfully settle their cases. Our IRS whistleblowers on the Hunter Biden case were elevated and promoted by Secretary Scott Bessent, and so they are now senior leaders at the IRS. So we have seen very positive response to the clients that had blown the whistle that we've helped. What we do think is important at this time is that they look down deeper into the agency at the DEA. There's kind of a reflexive instinct by agency heads, such as Administrator Cole at the DEA, to say, well, these are my people, these allegations must not be true. But so the DEA has now called for an inspector general investigation. We think it's important that they not wait for the results of that before reversing the 2024 change that gutted the fentanyl protocols. I think that's an important step for the Trump administration to take. They've already been very proactive in targeting cartels and going after fentanyl. And this is one more thing that will be very important to ensure that other offices around the country aren't also using this same tactic once the Biden DOJ told them it was okay.
Tristan Leavitt, president of Empower Oversight, thank you so much for joining the states to break this story down further. Meanwhile, a record of U.S. Border Patrol agents now serving under President Donald Trump. The Center Square contributor Bethany Blankley reporting, as of this spring, 21,000 Border Patrol agents now serving. U.S. Customs and Border Protection saying Wednesday this is the highest staffing level in U.S. Border Patrol's 102-year history. CBP's fiscal 2026 budget is about $23 billion, roughly the same as its fiscal 25 budget. And speaking of border security and immigration policy, asylum seekers who are arriving at the border are not entitled to entry. And the Department of Homeland Security has broad authority over the Temporary Protected Status Program. That's according to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2 separate cases ruled on Thursday. Read more about those at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more from the states. What's your favorite wine? Now, I'm more of a dry red wine kind of guy, and I have had a bout or two with some pretty decent box wine, but regardless if you're like me and are willing to try whatever's uncorked, or if you're a sommelier with a well-refined palate, that unless you're, enjoying some cheese with that and you want to use a spittoon to get the flavor and spit it out and then try some cheese. Either way, refined or not, if you're drinking wine, you're likely paying taxes. Now, how much? Well, it ranges from as high as $3.82 per gallon, or as low as 20 cents a gallon. And the lowest tax state might actually surprise you. All right, welcome back to the states. I'm Greg Bishop, and the Tax Foundation looking at all the states and the different types of taxes that there are on those spirits. They find that the tax on wine is at a higher rate than beer, but it's lower than liquor because wine's alcohol content is usually between those two different types of beverages. Now, according to the Tax Foundation, after adjusting for alcohol content, they say that states still levy higher taxes on wine, though some favor wine and tax beer at more than double the rate. Now, the highest tax burden on wine is levied in Kentucky, followed by Alaska, Florida, and Iowa. As you'll see there, Kentucky charges $3.82 per gallon of wine. Well, that seems like a lot. You can see how that can add up quick. Alaska at $2.50, Florida at $2.25, Iowa at $1.75, and New Mexico at $1.70 per gallon. Now, let's take a look at some of the lowest wine taxes per state by gallon. Kansas is at 30 cents a gallon. New York as well. Wisconsin, 25 cents a gallon. Texas, 20 cents a gallon. And California, 20 cents a gallon for wine. That's vastly different than the state having the highest gas taxes, but interesting to see that California, with its rich history and industry of valleys for wine vintners, it's clearly that they are having a lower tax on their product in that state than some of the other tax rates on other products. Now, there could be other things included in the overall price of wine where you live. It totally depends. Could it be a fee on cases of wine if you go out and buy a lot of cases of wine? Or is there a bottle fee, which might be based on the size of the container? What about sales taxes specific to alcohol beverages? This also can change from state to state and even jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Now, some of these prices also includes the wholesale tax rate of 10%, and that is converted into gallonage excise tax rates. The Tax Foundation said while some wine's overall market share among alcoholic beverages has been relatively steady, policymakers should remain mindful that excise taxes are ill-suited to raise general revenues. The Tax Foundation says policymakers should modernize this arcane category system by taxing directly according to alcohol content, making the system simpler and more neutral. Because you could start talking about, well, are wine coolers taxed at the same rate as wine, or should they be taxed like beer? You can see where things start to get a little muddy. By the way, if you're thinking about getting some wine this weekend, and you want to do a little bit more of a sommelier, well, do this the next time you sip some wine with friends. Take a sip, coat your tongue and palate to assess the wine's flavors, the tannins, the acidity. Form an O, gather the wine in the front of your mouth and purse your lips, and then breathe in to get that flavor. Set the spittoon ready, and then you project a narrow, fast stream into the bucket. But be sure not to splash it on your neighbors, all right? We'll be right back with more from the States.
Solve the problem of people's exorbitant electricity bills. We haven't passed one single bill to do so. The first one was a green energy plan.
The gentleman will suspend.
Data centers, a sore spot for a lot of states. In Pennsylvania, legislators attempting to reverse course when it comes to carve-outs to attract the data center industry to Pennsylvania. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Now, earlier this week, Pennsylvania State Representative Greg Vitale reflected that the state recently gave tax breaks to data centers, but now they are, quote, putting the brakes on.
Sales tax exemption, it's estimated by the governor for these data centers in fiscal year 2030 will cost the Commonwealth about $517 million a year. Think of what an additional $517 million can buy as far as budgetary needs. We're giving these sales tax exemptions to companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, companies that have net incomes in excess of $100 billion a year. This is not right. This is not needed. This is not what our constituents want.
Now, Vitale is tapping into something that the recent Voters' Voice poll for the Center Square shows. American voters believe building more data centers in the United States not worth the potential strain on local electricity, water, and infrastructure, and that the negatives outweigh the importance for national security in competing with China. Joining us to discuss this further is the Center Square reporter, John Stife. John, thanks for taking time with us here for the States. Just how stark is the issue of data centers for those that support it and those who oppose it?
Well, it's really hard to be one of those people that support it right now because it's really clear from this poll. I know we like our poll, but there's other polls out there too that say the same thing, that say people don't want the tax breaks to be given to these data centers. People don't believe that it's good for their electricity bills. People think that there's contamination of water related to it. People just don't like them. They don't like them anyway. They don't want them with a fox. They don't want them with in a box, or even, Greg, I know you like this, boxed wine. They don't even want it with that. They don't want any part of these data centers. They don't want them near them. And maybe they'd want them somewhere else, but they're not as concerned with national security and with beating China in the race to AI as they are with not having these things near them.
Yeah, that's something that I think is really fascinating about this. It's one thing to just touch the pulse of, hey, do you like data centers? Do you want them in your backyard? Clearly, I mean, from the stories that we're getting out of the Center Square reporters across the country, John, is, it's Ohio, it's Illinois, it's Pennsylvania. I mean, they're getting ready to put a moratorium on, data centers, and we'll hear a little bit more from what Pennsylvania has to say about all of this. But when you compare that, and then you start asking, well, what about competition with China? They're more concerned about an American-built data center in their backyard than they are about the possible threats of China. Break those numbers down for us a little bit.
Well, one really interesting thing about this is that a lot of the legislation, a lot of these tax breaks were put in place with a whole different version of data center that we were thinking about before, the one that stores all your stuff, the cloud. But now we've turned into AI data centers. First of all, they cost way, way more. And second of all, their function is not the same. This is about computing with AI. That's the important thing with the competition with China, that we advance at the same pace as them. But what comes with that is what Pennsylvania is dealing with, what Wisconsin's dealing with. They gave these tax breaks, and they were like, oh, maybe over the life of these tax breaks, 150 million or something like that. And now Pennsylvania's saying 500 million a year. Wisconsin, 4 data centers alone, AI data centers in the state, $1.5 billion of tax break for electricity, the servers in there, all the supplies and construction. Microsoft just opened the first of 2 in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. They don't have a ton of employees there. They said, well, there's 500 full-time people that work at the facility. Some are contractors, some are Microsoft employees. And when they go online with the second one, and this is the cell phone site in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin, they put 2 data centers there. And when the second one goes online, it's going to be 800 employees for these 2 data centers that I think they're $20 billion facilities, and it's worth 800 jobs long term. It was 10,000 construction jobs. It put people to work for 3 to 5 years to build these things. It's great for construction workers in the short term, but there's not a ton of employment long term. And if you think about where we were at previously 5 years ago with data centers, where we are today, where are we going to be in 5 years with these things that they're building? Like, the technology is advancing incredibly fast, so we don't even know what's coming next.
It really is. I mean, and a lot of investment is being poured into this as well, as you've reported as part of this story. But some of this, the competition with China being outweighed by concerns over data centers. Those are 2 issues. But I think in Pennsylvania, State Representative Craig Williams, he kind of tapped into something when the debate was going on about reversing course in Pennsylvania, right? Several years ago, they're like, data centers, come on in. We'll give you tax breaks. We'll give you tax breaks. Now they're completely reversing course and looking to put a moratorium on those tax breaks, regain, hundreds of millions of dollars in, taxpayer benefits to the state. But Craig Williams, he said that this seems to kind of be not touching on a crucial point that Pennsylvanians and others across the country are dealing with.
Still have not solved the problem of people's exorbitant electricity bills. We haven't passed one single bill to do so. The first one was a green energy plan.
The gentleman will suspend. The topic before the House today is House Bill 2198, not electricity bills. Gentlemen may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. House Bill 2198 is very much an electricity bill because it is about cost allocation.
Now, obviously, John, it's a very complex issue, but he seems to kind of make clear that none of this is really doing much to reduce energy costs.
Right. And that's part of what was asked in the poll that people are so afraid of and have already seen part of is that energy bills have gone up. And there have been a lot of reasons for that. Energy policy, like he was talking about, they're moving away from traditional sources of energy, closing things down instead of just expanding and using everything that they can to bring in more energy for the supply and demand that's about to happen. Because a lot of these AI data centers are like the one in Port Washington, Wisconsin. Again, I know Wisconsin, that's what I'll cite. That one uses as much electricity as the whole city of Los Angeles. And you have to think about, well, if there's not enough electricity prices are going to go up because of that. So they need more sources of energy too, and they need it fast because these are coming up everywhere. They're growing, and all the infrastructure that needs to be put in for these electricity bills as well to bring it to these data centers and to bring it to people that will work at these data centers costs money. And people want those companies to be paying for that, and especially the new infrastructure related to it, and not have it be added onto their bill at their house.
It's pretty complex, especially when you start talking about the energy components, the tax subsidy components, the work rules and labor issues that might come up locally. I mean, you've got a whole bunch of things, and the issue of transparency with non-disclosure agreements. John, we could talk about this for quite some time. Greatly appreciate you taking the time here with the states. Now, in other poll data around technology, most Americans say that they do not trust artificial intelligence to provide accurate and unbiased information about politics and current events, according to the Voters' Voice poll. The Center Square's poll found 57% of American voters either trust AI, not very much, or not at all when it comes to providing accurate and unbiased information. Now, among the split, 29% of voters said that they did not trust it very much, and 28% of voters said they did not trust it at all. What about jobs? Well, roughly 70% of Americans say they were at least somewhat concerned that artificial intelligence could replace their jobs. Center Square's Voters' Voice poll found 34% of registered voters reported feeling somewhat concerned that AI would do their jobs. The poll also found roughly 36% of Americans said that they were very concerned about AI replacing them at work. Now, poll data also shows many Americans do not think that there's enough government regulation on artificial intelligence. The Voters' Voice poll found 45% of registered voters said that there is too little government regulation of AI. Only 13% of voters said that there was too much government regulation of AI. And 23% said that there was just about the right amount. Now, what about personhood? A vast majority of Americans reject the idea of giving legal rights or personhood to artificial intelligence. According to that poll, we found that 77% of registered voters think AI should be treated always as a tool controlled by humans, not an entity to confer legal rights. Now, only 11% of registered voters said advanced AI systems should eventually be eligible for legal rights or personhood. Now, as AI systems become more advanced, some argue they display more human-like behaviors, such as emotion, attention, and moral responsibility, sparking a debate among some scholars and likely sparking more dystopian sci-fi docuseries for streaming services. This is The States. We have more coming right up. We'll be right back. Earlier this week, the Center Square publisher Chris Krug and PhD economist Orphe Devungi, they discussed some areas of the country where housing prices are so high that even a starter home, that's right, your first home, is costing $1 million.
Today we're talking about the $1 million starter home spreading across the country. It's mostly on the coast, but why renting just got a little bit more affordable. And in a matter of measured years. Hey, Dr. O, there's a record 242 cities across the United States now that have a typical starting home that's worth $1 million or more. That's nearly triple the pre-pandemic count. Meanwhile, renting just hit its most affordable level in years for a median household income. And let's just start simple with this. You know, when Zillow says starter home, what do they actually mean? And this is coming from your reporting at Zillow. By the way, you had a chance to talk with CBS about this over the last week, and I enjoyed watching that interview. But when you're talking about a starter home, what do they mean? And what does it tell us that there are now 242 cities across the United States where a starter home is $1 million?
Yeah, the bottom rung of the housing ladder now costs $1 million in a record 242 cities. And it's not just the coast, like you said earlier. Unfortunately,
it's mostly the coasts that are jamming that number up, right?
It is. It is. You know, it's the New York, New Jersey, California, many California markets, Washington, some in Florida. But yeah, let's start with the basics. What do we mean by starter home? It's defined as a home in the lowest third of home values in a given region. So you look at the distribution of home values in each region, and in some markets, the typical home value in that lowest third is at least $1 million. And I think that's crazy. That's crazy. And
big number.
And it's, you know, like I said, it's not just the coast, right? It's, you know, there are some in Wyoming, there are some in Illinois, in your home state of Illinois. Mm-hmm. There are some in Texas, right? Before the pandemic, it was Colorado. You had like Denver, I think, area.
Well, you say in that interview, I mean, there are now 26 states, and the fastest growth is, you know, of these homes is New York and New Jersey. But what changed to push the $1 million? I think everybody's kind of like, okay, yeah, you know, if you want to live, you know, like somewhere big or on the coast, it's going to cost you $1 million, and that seems ridiculous, but it's understandable. But there's 26 states now where this is the case, and what was it that caused this push to the inland states?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is the pandemic surge in home buying caused by low mortgage rates, plus the fact that people had been delaying moving for a while, right? Caused prices to increase very rapidly. And that price increase caused housing to get unaffordable very quickly on the coast first. And then you had this movement during the pandemic inward, and a bunch of markets inland started also to see rents and prices rise very rapidly.
So what are some of the cities that are on your list? What, you know, when you look at these 242 markets, I mean, it's not just all the, you know, the coastal points that would be familiar to people, or outside of metro markets where we're like, okay, I get it. Like, where do you think it's the most surprising?
Yeah, I think some of the Midwest markets would be surprising to me, but even Texas markets are surprising to me, right? And then you look at kind of the number of millionaires that go and move to those areas, and you realize that there is a big inflow of wealth in some Texas markets. Mm-hmm. That would, of course, push prices up if not met by a surge in housing supply, right? Mm-hmm. And so now, of course, the good news is that a lot of markets in Texas have actually built a lot of housing over the past few years, and that has helped to tame price and rent growth. So that's the good news. But yeah, I mean, this is still kind of let me put it this way. Hopefully, that growth is going to slow down significantly now because of the inflow of supply that we got in Texas, right? But there are markets that just don't build enough housing at all, right? You look at markets in New York and New Jersey, those are markets, there's so many cities in those areas that just don't build housing. Why? Because they're too restrictive in terms of land use restrictions and building codes that builders just would prefer not to even bother. Yeah. If a builder is going to go on and take the cost, right? The cost of delays, the cost of all of the restrictions that are put on how to build and where to build and how to build, then they would have to pass that cost on to consumers. And there probably wouldn't be a lot of consumers in the current environment where interest rates are 6.6% or 6.5%, whatever they are today, to go ahead and pay for that house, right? And so in some of these markets, builders are just not participating.
Right.
In some of those markets, they're just not even allowed to build, period.
Right. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You look at Suffolk County, Long Island, and Nassau County, Long Island, the restrictions are so tough that, the typical home in that market is old, very old.
Yeah.
Builders are they just can't go in there and build any housing because, the home that they're going to build is going to be very expensive.
Right.
Which is why, the starter home in some of those markets is over $1 million. Unfortunately, it's not just the Hamptons anymore. It's Nassau County, Long Island. It's parts of New Jersey. It goes all around the New York metro area. It's just so unaffordable. Then you got a couple of markets. You got Wyoming, right? You got some of those markets near these beautiful places with great mountain views, these beautiful parks in Wyoming and Montana, where basically, you can't get a starter home for under $1 million. Right. So yeah, it's unbelievable what's happened in the past few years, and it's spreading around the country. But hopefully, in the markets where you've seen a big surge in housing supply, we're not going to see that number continue to increase that rapidly.
Well, and you'd referenced that rents, however, are kind of like becoming more affordable, and in some of these same markets. So, I mean, can you make sense of that for us?
Yeah, and so I wouldn't call it affordable. I would call it a slowdown in rent growth. The fact that rent growth has slowed is a combination of higher supply for in Texas and being one of the markets, or Florida, right, in the places that have built housing during the pandemic. And so I think that's the good news, right? Is that some of those places that have built a lot of housing where prices had risen a lot, builders came in to fill the gaps, right? The big deficits. But in some markets that just haven't built, you're really not seeing that adjustment, right? And you look at Chicago, for example. Chicago has some of the fastest rent growth in the country. You look at New York markets, rents are still rising very rapidly relative to everywhere else. And so that's unfortunate. I think keeping housing more affordable for more people means building housing. How do we build more housing? Well, we make it easier for builders to build. We lower their cost. We don't increase them. And unfortunately, a lot of local governments have not gotten the memo and have continued to make it very difficult for builders to build housing. Now, the good news is that even the federal government's getting involved. Everybody's talking about housing affordability, and more jurisdictions are starting to say, hey, we got to do something about this.
Yeah. Well, thanks as always, Dr. O. Make sure you read Orphe's Everyday Economics columns Mondays in the Center Square and across the Center Square Newswire.
Welcome back to the States. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. A Lancaster, Virginia County Circuit Court judge Thursday granted a preliminary injunction temporarily preventing that state's state police from enforcing the state's new ban on certain types of firearms before it's set to take effect next week. The Center Square reporter, Charlene Guerrero, reports the injunction was granted in Crump v. Katz, a lawsuit brought by Gun Owners of America, Gun Owners Foundation, Virginia Citizens Defense League, Virginia Citizens Defense Foundation, and individual plaintiffs challenging Senate Bill 749. Now, implementation of the law was set to begin Wednesday next week. Attorney General Jay Jones said the Commonwealth will seek an emergency stay and appeal the ruling. Senate Bill 749 prohibits the purchase, sale, manufacture, import, and transfer of certain semi-automatic firearms and ammunition feeding devices capable of holding more than 15 rounds. Democratic Governor Abigail Spanberger signed that into law. The plaintiffs argue the law violates the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and Article 1, Section 13 of the Virginia Constitution. Follow Thursday's ruling. Gun Owners of America and the Virginia Citizens Defense League, they said the injunction also temporarily blocks enforcement of the law's 15-round magazine capacity limit and public carry restrictions while that case proceeds. Gun Owners of America said the injunction remains in effect through December 31st unless modified by the court. It'll be interesting to see just how gun sales are doing throughout the weekend in Virginia. Meanwhile, the California Assembly and Senate passed a constitutional amendment Thursday that would increase the state's rainy day fund from 10% to 20% of general fund revenues. The Center Square California reporter Madeline Shannon reports that measure now heads to the November 3rd ballot for California voters to approve or reject. Assembly member Jesse Gabriel had the amendment number 20, and he said it aims to increase the state's reserves for future years. It's roughly akin to someone putting more money in savings now for a cushion in the future.
This is a proposed constitutional amendment that would strengthen and modernize our rainy day fund. And I want to be clear that the premise of this amendment, the premise of this proposal, is the common sense wisdom of California families. That when you have good times, you should set aside a little bit of money so that you can be prepared for downturns, that you can be prepared for unexpected emergencies. And there's a lot of technical details in here that only a budget wonk could love. But at its basis, at its core, this is a practice that businesses, that families, that nonprofits, that anyone who believes in responsible fiscal management would adopt.
Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, eliminating a de facto electricity tax and boosting funding for school choice programs share space in one legislative proposal handed back to Pennsylvania's House of Representatives late Thursday afternoon. Now, despite an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote in the Senate, the bill's chance in the now narrowly divided lower chamber not so clear-cut. Why? Well, the Center Square regional editor Kristen Smith reports even with broad support for eliminating the gross receipts tax on electricity bills in Pennsylvania to the tune of a $500 annual savings per taxpayer, subsidizing tuition and services for students in private religious and special education schools has long troubled the Democratic majority House. House Bill 1667, as amended by the upper chamber Thursday, asks for $25 million more. Now, the measure was amended in the Senate, but not without opposition from State Senator Lindsey Williams.
Here we go again, increasing voucher money to unaccountable private schools before we meet our constitutional obligations to fully fund our public schools.
Now, there were other amendments, including digital ad taxes and changes to corporate gas tax rates that Democrats attempted, but they failed to advance, those measures being tabled. But another measure did pass from State Senator Lisa Boscola.
Average elementary school students' back-to-school list in Pennsylvania contains 16 to 17 items. This tax holiday isn't going to fix everything, Mr. President, but it will give families a little bit of breathing room at the exact time when they need it most, before school starts. At least 12 states have sales tax holidays on school supplies, including Florida, Virginia, Tennessee, so we're not really breaking any ground here. This amendment will have a limited impact on our state's budget.
Measure having different amendments with different provisions being kicked back over to the House. Be sure to head to thecentersquare.com for the latest out of Pennsylvania. And Illinois now has the 5th highest error rate in the nation for improper payments to recipients of federal food subsidies. And Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker is blaming the Trump administration. The Center Square Illinois reporter Jim Talamonte reports the U.S. Department of Agriculture Wednesday said the nation's state and territories had collected $10 billion in improper supplemental nutrition assistance program payments for 2025. Illinois' error rate of 14.67%. That's up from 11.56% last year and ranks 5th highest among states. Starting October 1st, states with average error rates of more than 6% will pay more for administrative costs. That means more state taxpayer cost, potentially costing Illinois taxpayers more than $800 million a year. A reporter asked Governor Pritzker about the increase at an event in Chicago Thursday. He said it's all with the goal by the federal government to basically push people off SNAP. Illinois House Minority Leader Tony McCombie said Pritzker blames congressional Republicans and President Trump all the time. She said this is how his to own that increased rate, and we're going to have to be very focused on how to fix that. So we'll be tracking that story as well. And that's just some of what America is talking about. Get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. You can join us back here next week for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the states, powered by the Center Square.